views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
All right, welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a tremendous show today. First up, child marriage. We have an advocate on the show who's going to discuss her own experiences with respect to getting married young and whether or not she thinks certain types of marriage involving children under 18 should be completely outlawed. Next up, our aging population and prisons. Should some of the inmates who have been in for a very long time be released on compassion based on their age? And finally, our last topic, Medicare, the expansion. Will it include certain benefits? Will it include dental? Will it include hearing? We're not sure. Our expert will be on to tell us. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have an interesting topic we have not really discussed on today's verdict, and it has to do with children marriage, women who are really manipulated or forced into marriage at a very young age. And we have somebody here today, Fraidy Reiss from Unchained at last. Fraidy, thanks for being here today.
Oh, thank you, David, for having me. It's an important discussion, as you said.
Important discussion. It happens to be all over the news. With Bob Dylan, courting somebody who was much younger at the time in the 1965. A lot of celebrities married, women who were under 17, everyone from Elvis Presley to Jerry Lee Lewis. Is this still happening? Is this still going on?
Of course it is still happening. And the problem is that in the United States, and most of the United States, child marriage remains legal. So in many cases, what we're doing is handing out really get out of jail free cards to predators who marry a child and would otherwise be charged with a sex crime. Instead, we're saying, here's a marriage license. It's all legal now.
So let's talk age. Let's talk numbers. What's considered to be too young, certainly, with respect to your position? 17, 16, 15, what?
So let's be very clear. This has nothing to do with maturity. It has to do with legal capacity. So the answer to your question is the right age is whatever the age of adulthood is. The age of adulthood in 47 US states is 18, and in 3 states it's higher. There's no state in the United States where you get the rights of adulthood before the age of 18, unless you are emancipated in some cases, which is a separate discussion. Even then, you don't belong getting married because you only get some limited legal rights. So our position at Unchained at Last, and I as a forced marriage survivor, my position is you should never be allowed to enter into this serious contract of marriage before you get the rights of adulthood that you need to navigate such a serious contract, which is 18 or higher in every US state. And when I talk about basic legal rights, I mean the right to leave home, to escape from an abusive spouse, or from parents who are planning an unwanted wedding for you, the right to get into a domestic violence shelter, the right to retain an attorney, the right to bring a legal action, including a divorce or seek a protective order. These are rights that typically are reserved for those 18 or older.
So I happen to agree with your position here. The thing that strikes me a little strange sometimes is that it looks like the average age is really only a 4-year difference among those who are considered to be, or between those who are under 18 and over. So you're having a 17-year-old woman and a 21-year-old man. What's the big deal?
Mm-hmm.
What? Tell
Right.
me the big deal.
I'll tell you what the big deal is. First of all, let's not refer to a 17-year-old as a woman, because technically that is a child. So,
No, I just want you to know, I refer them to as a woman, because in any other concept on this show, if I ever referred to anybody under 18 as a girl, I'd be crucified. So that's why I refer them to a woman, but you wouldn't consider them women. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm a former journalist, and in journalism school, I learned that anybody under the age of 18 is a minor, a girl or a boy, and anybody 18 or older gender we refer to as man, woman, etc. But putting that aside, here's why it's shocking and absolutely unconscionable when a 17-year-old marries, forget a 20-year-old, even an 18-year-old. 17 and 18, what's the big deal? Again, this has nothing to do with maturity. If this were about maturity, then that would be completely fine. The problem is that 17-year-old is the one who has all the limited legal rights. That 17-year-old is the one who has to be entered into the marriage, not of their own free will and consent, because they don't have the right to enter into contracts. They're the ones who are typically not allowed to leave home, get into a domestic violence shelter, retain an attorney, file for divorce. The day you turn 18, there is a magical switch that is flipped where you get all of those rights. So when you look at a marriage between a 17-year-old and someone, whether they're 18 or 80, it doesn't matter how old the age difference really is irrelevant here. The problem is the disabilities of non-age, and those disappear the day you turn 18, whether or not you're mature enough.
Is the tide turning on this? Do you find that the states are starting to get in line, raising the age of consent? What's the trend?
Absolutely. So when we at Unchained at Last, we discovered this because I'm a forced marriage survivor. I founded Unchained to help other forced marriage survivors in the United States, and discovered that while we're typically able to help the adults age 18 or older who call us, there's almost nothing we can do to help somebody who is 17 or younger, even if they're turning 18 tomorrow. We once had a domestic violence shelter turn away a girl whose 18th birthday was the next day. They said, bring her back tomorrow. So we found it. So we, in addition to the services we provide to adults, we started pushing to end child marriage. At the time, it was legal in all 50 US states. That was as of 2015. It took us 3 years to convince the first state to end child marriage. That was Delaware in 2018. And since then, 5 other states, a total of 6 states and 3 US territories, by the way, have eliminated all marriage before 18, no exception. So this is definitely gaining momentum, and it's becoming a national movement. And now we have only 44 states to go.
Okay, we're making progress. Now, what I find interesting is the immigration aspect. Understanding that if you marry somebody who's a US citizen, you get to stay, or at least you can petition to stay, which would behoove these older gentlemen who are not from this country to find somebody who's younger, impressionable, and say, hey, let's get married and I can stay. I don't know what quid pro quo may go on there. Do you find that that adds to the issue, to the problem?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just being able to stay in the country. You can get a spousal or fiancé visa through a US citizen in the United States. So what we have seen a lot is children, particularly girls. In fact, there was a US Senate Homeland Security Committee report that showed that this happened. It happens almost always to girls who are forced to marry adult men overseas so that the men can get a visa and a path to citizenship. There is no minimum age right now under federal immigration law. There's no minimum age to petition for a foreign spouse or fiance or to be the beneficiary of a spousal or fiance visa. And what the Senate Homeland Security Committee found was that between 2007 and 2017, nearly 9,000 minors were involved in a spousal or fiance visa that was approved by the US State Department. Or I'm sorry, it was either by USCIS or State Department, because both of those have to approve these. And I believe it was USCIS. One of them had approved all of these spousal visas involving a minor. And in almost all of those cases, it was the minor party was a girl, the younger party was a girl. So we know this is happening in thousands of cases. And we have seen this anecdotally, girls being trafficked for their US citizenship.
And there are long-term repercussions for this in terms of education, job opportunities. Even if somehow this, the girl becomes a woman, she's over 18 and ends up getting divorced, but there are long-term consequences. Am I correct?
Yeah, although 70 to 80% of marriage before 18 marriage before 18 ends in divorce. So almost all of these marriages are going to fail. But yes, even after the marriage fails, there are devastating lifelong repercussions in almost every aspect of a girl or a woman's life. And this is based on research done right here in the United States, not in a developing country. The really devastating impacts of marriage before 18. And in fact, the US State Department calls marriage before 18 a human rights abuse because of this. Right. It's for health, education, economic opportunities. even her safety. She's much more likely to be physically assaulted by her spouse if she was married before.
Fraidy, before we let you go, can you just tell us where to find you or your organization if somebody's watching now and they'd like some help?
Yes, please. If you need help or know someone who does, go to unchainedatlast.org.
Fraidy, thank you very much. Great advice. It's a very important and it's all over the news. I mean, it's a really important topic. But thanks for being here.
Thank you, David.
All right, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a director from Release Aging People in Prison. Jose Saldana is with us. Jose, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, this is an extremely important topic concerning the incarcerated in New York and how they've been, should we say, in my opinion, they have been ignored when it comes to a certain age. Can you tell the viewers what exactly your organization stands for, if you could?
My organization, which is the Release Aging People in Prison campaign, is a grassroots community organizing campaign that advocates for the release of aging people in prison and those serving long-term prison sentences.
All right. Well, from what I understand, at least from the data, many of those who are incarcerated and are up there in age are people of color. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
What, in terms of the percentages, do you know exactly how, what that is in terms of the numbers?
Well, statistically, we have approximately 55% of people of color. And this is the Department of Corrections figures. In my experience, I've languished in prison for nearly 4 decades. And I came at a time when there was very few white incarcerated people. So in my experience, we're closest to 75% of the population.
When you were incarcerated, did you see an older population there with you?
Absolutely, yes, I did. And I was mentored by elder people. Absolutely, these elder men who took me under their wing. And if it wasn't for them, I would have been a lost soul. I would definitely not be the man that I am today.
We've had on the show a few weeks ago a guest that discussed the Fair and Timely Parole Act, which basically suggested that in the past, if you came up for parole, you would almost automatically be denied the first time. Tell me, why would we even consider doing that?
That's the culture of the New York State Parole Board. We call it the paradigm of punishment and revenge. The Parole Board has 16 criteria, factors that they are to consider in making a release determination. They stay stuck on one factor. They begin there and stay stuck, and that is the nature of the crime. They start asking the first question and the last question on the nature of the crime, and they never get to the extraordinary rehabilitative accomplishments that most men and women bring before them.
So now you have men and women who are, I guess, over 70? What would you consider to be of the age that they should be considered for release?
55. We promote the Elder Parole Bill, which provides that if a person has reached 55 years old and has served 15 years, they will be entitled to an individualized assessment by the New York State Parole Board as to whether at this point in their lives they should be returned back to society. And I'd like to add one thing about that 55. In the 10 years that Governor Cuomo was the governor of New York State prisons, of New York State, roughly 800 people have died in his prison who were over 50 years old. And the average age of death was 58 years old.
Well, the only thing I have to say to that is, I'm older than 55. And it's hard I can't imagine myself, I'm going to be 56 very soon, being able to argue that I'm of some of the age that I should be forgiven for a crime because I'm getting up there in age. I'm just wearing the other hat for a second. What would you say to those who might take that position?
Well, first of all, it's not a question of forgiving. We're talking about a question of just extending an opportunity for the person to be released. And you're 55 and you look like you're in great shape. You look marvelous, but you have not spent 35, 40 years in the early years staying up at night, worried to death that something may happen to your daughters, worried to death that your sons may be the victim of gun violence. These things weigh heavily on a person's psyche, and the lack of adequate medical care, as well as the oppressive prison conditions. So a combination of all these things make you much older than you're 55 years old.
Well, that's a good answer. Well, let me ask you a question now. So politically, you need some headwinds here, right? Does it look like those up in Albany, I know that's where you are right now, seem to be in line with what you're asking? Are they trying to, chop away, maybe in terms of the age limits? What do you think is happening in Albany?
Well, right now, we do have the numbers. We have the numbers for support of both bills in the Senate and the Assembly. And what is stopping us right now is leadership in the House, the Speaker, and the Majority Leader in the Senate. It's up to them whether they have the political will. We're talking about correcting a system that has systemically deprived people of their liberty inhumanely. Sentences were imposed on Black and Latinx people that were far, far greater than were imposed on their white counterparts. We're saying this is a reality. We're saying that they have the opportunity right now to correct this, to make some type of moves toward correcting this injustice.
Okay, so, and your side, by the way, is how are you getting more and more of the community behind you? I understand the politicians. I know how you're working that. I get that. But how do you get somebody like me, some of the viewers, how do you get them behind you? What are you doing in terms of like a grassroots marketing effort?
I'm a prime example. And there are many, many like me inside still, and some out here. When I speak to the community members, not those who are impacted by the criminal legal system, but those who are not impacted by the criminal legal system, and I explain to them why it is a moral and fiscal issue to address this mass incarceration history in New York State, and why men like me are not a threat to public safety, but enhance community safety. And I explain to them how we have enhanced safety in prisons that we have been in for decades. And we can transform that into our home communities, and how our home communities need men and women like me who can reach these kids who are abandoned by society and they're lost. We're the ones that can reach them and give them a vision of a future that does not involve gang violence or criminal way of life. And that is our value. And we should not be thrown away when we have such great value to our community.
Well said. We're going to leave it there, Jose. We'd like you to come back maybe in a couple of months. Let us know if you were successful in getting the rest of Albany to agree. In the meantime, we appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much.
All right. Today's verdict has so much more. Stay with us right after this. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a discussion today on everything involving Medicare. Jonathan Oberlander, professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Jonathan, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so 1965, I'm born. 1965, Medicare seems to be, at least in the news, enacted. Tell the viewers a little bit about the history of Medicare, and then we'll maybe get into the discussion of benefits and what the viewers can expect when they bring their Medicare card into a provider.
Sure. So to understand the origins of Medicare, you really have to go back to the Truman administration in the late 1940s. And Harry Truman was the first US president to back national health insurance. And his plan for national health insurance would resemble what today we would call single payer, federal government insurance for everybody. He couldn't pass it. There was a lot of opposition from the American Medical Association. The majority in Congress, even though it was a majority of Democrats, was really, Congress at that time was governed by a de facto coalition of conservative Democrats in the South and Republicans. So Truman doesn't get anywhere with his national health insurance proposal. And the folks who were in favor of health reform in the Truman administration went back to the drawing board and they asked themselves, okay, we can't enact national health insurance in the United States for everybody. What can we do? And so they hit on the idea of having a federal health insurance program for the elderly. That would become Medicare. They first came up with that idea in the early 1950s. It took over a decade to pass all the way to 1965. So that's where Medicare comes from.
So, you have an aging population, and we understand that as a society. We're only getting older, and there's more and more of us. So this would seem like a no-brainer. But from what I'm reading, once 1965 came around and it was enacted, we never really took the time to expand it, given the fact that the population was growing and we were getting older. Why? What are your thoughts on that? Why didn't we make this a priority from the very, very beginning?
So there are two different ways in which Medicare did not expand. The architects of Medicare didn't see it as a final step. When you hear Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or somebody like that talk about Medicare for all, that was the vision in 1965. They thought they were going to start with the elderly, and then actually their plan was to add children next. And so you would have the oldest in society and the youngest, and then Medicare would expand to cover everybody. That expansion of Medicare into Medicare for all did not happen. And it did not happen in large part because American politics changed. Medicare was enacted at the height of the Great Society during the Johnson administration, a time of liberal activism. Within a decade, American politics had really shifted to the right. So much so that by the time Jimmy Carter is elected president as a Democrat in 1976, you could argue he was more conservative on health policy than Richard Nixon was, the administration before. So that dream of Medicare for all is really stymied by the shift in American politics.
Professor, I mean, my parents are in their 80s, and the vision starts to go, the hearing starts to go, you have dental issues. These are three basic bodily areas that need tending to as you end up in your 80s and hopefully into your 90s. Are they going to be included? And if so, will there only be a limited amount of money that could be allocated to these types of benefits? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm a lot younger than in my 80s, but I've got a lot of problems, as you can see, with my vision and so forth. And we have had in the United States a history of separating the mouth out from the rest of the body. And so younger Americans frequently don't have dental coverage right through their employer. They have to buy it separately or they're uninsured. When you look at the Medicare population, half of all enrollees on Medicare do not have dental insurance. It's disproportionately low-income Americans, disproportionately Black Americans, disproportionately Hispanic Americans. So there are lots of issues of health equity here. There's no doubt it's a compelling case. How can you have a health insurance program for older Americans and not cover, as you pointed out, these basic needs of dentistry, of vision, of health? There is a good chance that it's going to be added into this bill. Whether it passes, well, if you can tell me what Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, is going to do and how he's going to vote, then we'll know something. So the Democrats, of course, have the slimmest of majorities in the Senate and not much of a majority in the House. So it really depends how these members of Congress and the Democratic Party right in the middle vote on this.
It was interesting. I was reading, some notes that you had about Joe Namath and his commercial and talking about how, Medicare covers everything and covers dental, but it doesn't. There's only particular plans that do cover this. And I think the average viewer, certainly in the Bronx and Manhattan, they don't understand that they don't have this particular coverage. It's almost, I'm not saying, it's a fraud, but it's certainly a misleading type of commercial.
There is a real misunderstanding about Medicare. Medicare is not comprehensive coverage, and there are lots of things, long-term care stays in nursing homes that Medicare does not cover. People think Medicare is going to be first dollar coverage. And even for the services it covers, it is not. And most Medicare beneficiaries don't have just Medicare. Your viewers will know this. Most of them will have Medicare plus something. It might be Medicare plus Medicaid. It might be Medicare plus a private Medigap plan, a supplemental plan that they buy, or retiree health insurance they have, or about 2 out of every 5 Medicare beneficiaries today are enrolled in something called Medicare Advantage. These are private insurance plans that contract with the federal government, operate within Medicare, and often provide extra benefits.
Professor, what do you think about, President Biden, who campaigned on lowering the age from 65 to 60? Is that realistic?
It would make a lot of sense to do. It might actually attract support from some in the employer community who might be eager to give the government people.
But it's certainly not from the health system. The hospitals don't want it, and the doctors don't want it. They want to get paid from the private.
This is the problem. This is absolutely the problem. So if you look at sort of Biden's big ticket plans to go beyond the ACA. One is to put the eligibility age for Medicare down from 65 to 60. The other is to create a public option. Both of those are opposed fiercely by the healthcare industry. They're worried about dollars. And they're worried about federal influence over their payments. So it's a harder mountain to climb than to expand Medicare's existing benefits, which is not easy.
All right, well, Professor, we don't have too much time. You have a couple of viewers who are watching right now. They want to go to the doctor. They're not quite sure what they should show, what type of card, what are their benefits. What would you tell them right now? In other words, any advice you could give them at all?
Medicare is really confusing, and I would really look for a place like the Center for Medicare Rights in New York, in the New York area, a Medicare advocacy organization that's there to help older Americans and others on Medicare navigate the system, because it really is complicated, and you want to get advice and understand what your rights are and what your benefits are.
Listen, Jonathan, I want to thank you very much for coming on. Great advice. We appreciated New York. I know you're down in North Carolina, and hopefully the weather's getting a little bit better. And you'll come back visit us soon.
Anytime. Thanks so much for having me.
It was a real pleasure, Jonathan. Thanks so much. All right, stay with us. Today's Verdict has so much more right after this. That's all we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you have an issue or a topic you'd like to see on a future Today's Verdict, just email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until the next time, reach a verdict. See you in 2 weeks.